Hello Year 6 and welcome to Lesson 5 of your instructional writing. I'm hoping you've enjoyed this week's learning, thinking about how to create the ultimate human being, the essence of the human soul, and what makes us inherently human, how we can create the perfect person. I also hope you've had fun playing around with our English language and trying to be creative and witty in your humour. Remember, your writing should always be to entertain the reader, so that's what you're trying to do today. Obviously, artificial intelligence hasn't taken over the world, and humans do still exist, and we are still being born, and we haven't got to recreate the essence of a human soul. This is a bit of fun in the writing, so try to keep your reader interested and engaged by using some comedy and humour and playing around with our language to do so. Now, there's one last thing I'd like you to think about when you're editing today, and that is how you can vary your sentence structures using subordinating conjunctions. So there's an example here of a sentence that begins with an imperative verb, take a small pinch of fear and add to the mixture once the other ingredients are blended. Now I've put once the other ingredients are blended in purple because that is our subordinate clause. If I move the subordinate clause to the beginning of the sentence and we put the comma there, it just varies that clause structure. Once the ingredients are blended, take a small amount of fear and add to the mixture. So then it puts the time conjunction at the beginning. It makes that a subordinated conjunction opener. Then that's just another way to consider how you vary your clause structures when you're doing your final editing today. So I just thought I'd add that one in before we moved on to writing our conclusions. So lastly, we need to summarise and conclude our instructions. We need to think about what we would do at the end when the recipe is finished and made. Now, if this was a set of instructions for a meal, you would tell the reader what to serve the dish with, and you would suggest accompaniments. Now, accompaniments are things that go alongside your main dish. A side plate, serve alongside. People often say, serve with a good wine or something along those lines. Now, we're not going to serve wine with our human, but we certainly might do something similar in a creative way if we're going to serve up our human soul. So I've got some ideas here. A human exists in society amongst other people. So friends, perhaps, in amongst a family. So we need to think possibly about where we put our human. Here's some sentence openers to give you some ideas to get started. It's a good idea to place your human, always serve your soul into, serve up with, ensure you always place your human in. So considering where you might place your human and how you might begin those sentences, and then where might that be? In a warm, loving family, amongst a caring community, with a fine selection of friends. Quite often you say with a fine selection of wine. So I've played around a little bit with the idea of recipe writing. With a large helping of love. Again, a large helping, you might use that to describe food quantities rather than normally when we describe these abstract nouns like love. Inside a heart full of hopes and dreams. Notice how the word heart full isn't together because it is not meant to be. It's a heart full of hopes and dreams. Okay, so that's why it's got two L's for that spelling there. Now you can think about how creative you want to be in placing your human somewhere and then putting this into a final statement. Let's have a look at this conclusion here. Now this conclusion is fairly formal in its tone. Let's have a look at it and read it together and see what you think of it and whether or not it's done the job it needs to. When all the ingredients have been added and fully blended, you will be able to see your perfect soul develop into a living, breathing human. After this process is complete, the human is ready to thrive and take on their own life. If I were you, ideally always ensure your human is served alongside a caring family and a pile of friends. This will help them cope in a challenging world as they will provide invaluable nurturing and support. Once served, allowed to develop and mature for a lifetime. So like a recipe, I've played around with the language of serving up a food portion, serve alongside, for example, or once served, allow to, and you might develop, warm, cool, those sorts of things that you would write in a recipe. I think once all the ingredients have been added, so you're sort of saying this is the final step of the process. And this is what you've created, and then you've got time conjunctions there to explain what has taken form in your kitchen. Now, there's also quite a formal tone to this conclusion because I've used a subjunctive here. If I were you, which we know, think back to our SPAG lesson, is a very formal way of offering some advice. If I were you, ideally always ensure your human is served alongside. So this is still a very formal tone, and it matches the style that we've been working along all through this piece of writing, where you are addressing your reader, you're still directing it to them, writing in the second person, but there's no informal tone in terms of contractions, and it's still a very formal style all the way through. Now you could flip back to the informal voice, and this would look a little bit different to this, and we'll have a little look at a different one that I've written on the next page. So let's have a look at this one. It's slightly different, a little bit more informal in its tone because I've put some contractions into the writing, and that makes it sound a little bit more chatty, less formal in its style. If you've followed each step of these instructions carefully, then your life form should be ready. It's always best to place your human soul inside a heart full of hope, then leave it to settle inside a warm family before serving alongside a good portion of friends. Allow time to mature and develop fully before taking on the robots. These accompaniments will help your human cope with the challenges of battling against AI and regaining control of society. Now, just like the last one, I've used some of those ideas about how you serve up a plate of food. You might leave something to cool, or I've said leave it to settle inside a warm family. You might have suggested, if you were writing a recipe, to present it on a warm plate or something, but again I've got that double meaning of the word warm. And then I've said allow it to mature and develop, which again you can have mature cheese, and so it's sort of a play on words in terms of it just means it's got older, and it's well, the cheese doesn't get any wiser, but a human might get a little wiser with maturity. And then you've also got some things like placing your soul into something, so you might you would do that if you were placing your salad in a bowl or something along those lines. We're trying to make that link between a recipe for food and a recipe for a human, but without making it quite so obvious. And then I've done things like serve alongside a good portion of friends. You wouldn't normally say your friends were in portions, but it's that language of the kitchen again, language of recipe writing to help. And then the word accompaniment as well, which is something that you serve alongside a main dish. So once you've done that, you've got your informal style. You've related it back to that challenge that the robots were presenting you with as well. So remember, your conclusion should link back to how you introduced your whole piece. So if you mentioned artificial intelligence and the battle against robots at the beginning in your introduction, you need to reference that again at the end. Otherwise, your reader won't really know why they wrote their recipe in the first place. So it's important to reflect back on that before you finish up. And that's how you can crack on with your conclusion. I have put a few sentence openers here. I'm just going to add another one in, which is the one I used on the last page. If you have followed the instructions carefully, comma, then, and then you can add that, followed the instructions. So that would be another one you could use. You might come up with some of the others just to introduce your conclusion, so it might get you going and thinking about how you might start it. And then the last thing you're going to do today is go through a checklist. Now this is the criteria checklist from the government website of how all Year 6 children should write and what sort of things they should include in their writing, and I've selected the ones that are most appropriate for this writing. So technical language, choosing your level of formality in your writing, the use of adverbials of time and place, the passive voice you might have included, modal verbs, imperative verbs, wide range of clause structures to use in this writing, which I've talked about a lot, and I really hope that you haven't started all your sentences with imperative verbs, but you've really mixed it up, including an embedded clause if possible, using adverbs, prepositional phrases and expanded noun phrases. So all of these things help build on your ideas and develop more detail in your writing. And then in purple here I've put all your punctuation. We've talked a lot about how you can include semicolons and colons in expanded lists, how we can pop those hyphens in between words to make them adjectives, how we can use brackets to add a warning or a bit of advice, dashes to add a little bit of extra information to the end, plenty of opportunities for rhetorical questions at the beginning, and exclamation marks maybe at the end, and then commas all the time between your subordinate and main clauses. So there's lots of punctuation opportunities here, and I know that for a lot of you that's what you've really been working on in Year 6. Last of all, we need to think and check through your spellings. I will put the Year 5-6 spelling list on the Google Drive so you can go through that and check off some of the key spellings you might have used. And then finally, you need to make sure that you've written in a nice, clear and fluent style, and you've maintained your handwriting control throughout. And that's it, Year 6. I look forward to reading some of your examples, and I hope you have fun playing around with your language, being creative and really entertaining your reader throughout. Good luck, and I look forward to reading them.